the relationship between you and your in-laws can be a very interesting one. Now, for some couples, you and your in-laws actually just get along. Like, you've got a really good relationship, you get along, you do a lot of things together. Whereas for some couples, that's actually not the case. You'll find that you're in conflict with your in-laws, or you fought over certain things over the years, and the things have built up and there's tension and just conflict all over the place. But what we're going to do today is just highlight a few areas in which conflict may arise when it comes to couples and their in-laws. And along the way, we're going to offer some solutions of how you can deal with that, especially if you're finding yourself in such a situation. So from what you've heard or what you've observed or even personal experience, what do you think is one of the top, high up there, reasons why couples may not get along with their in-laws, or what causes conflict between couples and their in-laws?
Well, let's be honest, that period when you're getting married and you're planning a wedding or whatever that means, or what that looks like, typically speaking, what happens is you then have a lot of family clashes and a lot of voices within the family coming up saying, this is how do we do things in our family, this is how we do things in our family. If you think about it, that's how the relationship starts in most cases. I guess for the majority of people who, before you get married, you may be lucky enough that you've met quite a number of the family members already, and then by the time you get married, they've kind of met you, they kind of know your vibes, you've got some relationship. But for some couples, you may find that maybe they met the immediate family, you know, mom, dad, brother, sister, and maybe cousins. And then all of a sudden when they're getting married, that's when you meet the aunties and the uncles and the grandparents, and that's where you find that actually, there's a lot of tension that comes up in play. So the kind of things like I mentioned that happens is usually they're just, I guess, tradition, should I call it? Of just kind of, this is how we do it, things in our family. And they're trying to impose that to the other couple to say, you have no other choice but to do it our way.
I remember
and that already starts off.
We actually faced some of that at our wedding, where when we were planning the wedding, and then all these things are coming up like, well, we want you to have a big wedding and invite this person and this person, and then you'd get an auntie that's like, I've got like 5 friends that are my close friends and I want them there. And bear in mind, for me, it's like, Tando, do you even know these friends of aunties? And Tando's like, nah, I don't even know them. So that's already causing a clash, because you're feeling like, hold on a minute, but why should I invite those people?
And you can imagine that conversation then creates that friction. I'm not going to call it conflict, it's probably too strong, but creates a little bit of friction to then be like, okay, they just want to do things they don't want to listen to you. I guess that's the feeling, right? Like, they don't want to listen to me, they just want me to do it their way, and that already starts off in that negative up. So that's probably the first beginning point of how that plays out. What other things can you think about?
Well, going from that one, like going from the wedding one, I think when people have weddings, there's a lot of traditions that they want to sort of include within the wedding. Like, oh, this is a tradition that we do, so we'd love for you to include it in the wedding. So tradition is another one, because it also spills over to once you're married. There may be certain things or certain practices, I guess, or certain traditions that families are so used to doing that when you, let's say, have a child, or when you start having your home, it might be like, well, we were so used to just coming around together as family before you guys got married. So now, Linda, you should be willing and open to open your doors for us to always be in your house now that we're married. Why? Because it's a tradition. And similar with, okay, when you've had a child, you guys have had a child, and we've got this tradition to do this to children when they're born. So you should be willing to do it because it's a tradition that we were used to. Now you have a child, you should be willing to do it as well.
And we had no other option. So you also don't have an option. That's a big tradition, is a big one, and you typically find it. You typically find it with, like, you know, we're from an African country, Southern Africa, Zimbabwe. So like, there's a big piece on like how things are done, how, you know, grandfather somewhere so and so did it this way, and then they passed on to us, etc., and then we should do the same thing with our baby. That's definitely a big one, the tradition piece. And I think the friction as well comes up if you do marry somebody from a different country. You know, we're from the same country, so we haven't personally experienced this, but I've definitely heard of stories of people who marry, you know, one country to another, and the difference in the cultural kind of traditional things that we're mentioning here really comes to light. Obviously, between the two of you as husband and wife, it's almost like you know what you're like. You know, like in our marriage, listen, we're calm, we're cool. We're not really like traditionalists kind of thing. Like we're just how we are. But then the family now is where the clash has come into play, and obviously that's what we're talking about with tradition.
And I think that's the thing as well, though, like because you mentioned it right now when you say the family, that's where it comes to play. A lot of the times, I hear the saying quite a lot in like African countries where they say, well, if you're marrying him, you're marrying the family, or you're marrying into the family. So it's now a whole big hoo-ha, and everyone gets involved with everything. And that can be a lot for someone who may not be used to that and is coming from a completely different sort of tradition. Yeah.
And talking about family getting involved, the third thing I can think about is literally family kind of being involved in your marriage. And I mean that's fully involved, and to the point where maybe they even tell you what you should do in your marriage, where you should be buying your house and what you can't be doing, you know, how you should be treating each other, or even the fact that you have to run decisions by them before you make decisions, the two of you.
How you dress is a big one in a lot of Southern African countries.
Or what you do with your money, like basically as if there's no boundaries. It's literally, you almost feel like you're married to your mother-in-law more than you're married to your husband kind of thing, you know, where it's like the way that they do things, they have got that control, I guess, and that power over like how you do things. And obviously the conflict then comes in play where if one of you is like, hold on a second, like we should be doing this, just the two of us, it's our marriage, it's our house, it's our money, like why are they getting involved? And that's where the problems come in play.
And I feel like you touched on it as well. The whole boundaries thing is such a big thing. I remember before we got married, we had premarital counselling. And one of the things that our counsellor told us was, listen, before you even get married and say I do, you two need to sit down and have a conversation about what boundaries look like when it comes to family. And then when you've done that, you make sure that each of you implement these boundaries with your families or your sides of the family. At the time, I was just thinking, is it that deep though, the whole boundary thing? Because it was emphasized like quite deeply. And it was only when we got married and I'm like, okay, so I get it. In fact, whenever I've had friends that are getting married, I always say to them, listen, you need to make sure that you start thinking about boundaries and how you implement the boundaries. And fair enough, at times I've had like some of my friends come back to me and be like, but how can I have boundaries with my mom? Like, that's my mom though, like, or that's my dad. How do I implement a boundary with them? And my simple answer is this. If you want your marriage to be successful, you better implement those boundaries, because one of the things that maybe people don't realize, when you get married, the priorities sort of shift. Like one of the things that we were also taught about prior to getting married was like sort of like the order of priority once you get married. So once you're married, it's sort of like your husband comes first, but obviously for us, God comes first and then each other. And now that we have a child, our child comes after that, and then our parents, and then our siblings, so like order of priority. The whole point of having boundaries is also to help you know who to prioritize in that sort of like priorities list. And it will really help you when you understand that. But if you fail to implement those boundaries, your family are also seeing it as an open door. Like, oh, they're fine with us doing whatever. In life, people will treat you how you teach them to treat you. If you implement those boundaries, your family will respect them and then treat you the way you want to be treated. But if you don't, they will treat you how they think it's okay to treat you.
Another area that can definitely create some tension between your marriage and the in-laws is money. You know, I kind of mentioned this earlier about like your in-laws kind of telling you what to do with your money. But also there may be times where you find that maybe you're supporting your family and your partner isn't, but you know, you're supporting your family from a financial perspective is literally like, you know, I'm looking after them, I'm taking care of them, I'm helping them pay their bills and all the rest of it. And if your partner's like, okay, that sounds great, but like the priorities have shifted, as Linda mentioned earlier, you know, why is it that they can't take care of themselves? And then even if you try to have that conversation, they would feel like, no, you have to take care of us. Like, what do you mean you can't do it anymore? It's part of, you know, coming back to the tradition and culture thing we mentioned earlier as well. But I think whenever money is involved with like your families and your in-laws and your marriage, I feel like things will always get sticky.
It's like a mishmash, isn't it?
Things
it's
will
like
get
a
sticky.
mess. Yeah.
So that's definitely another area in which like you may find that there's some friction between your marriage and your in-laws.
But I also think sometimes let's give some credit to the other partner. It may be that it's just something that they're not used to.
True.
Or something that they've never seen before. So they're coming into it and being like, oh, but why are you supporting your parents? It's not a why I don't want you to do it, but it's a why, as in I've never seen this before. Like growing up, my parents never did this with their parents. So why is it that you do it? So sometimes I think it's about trying to understand where your partner's coming from, try and understand why they're doing what they're doing rather than attacking them for doing it. So I think that actually helps, yeah.
So, I mean, those are some of the reasons why you might have conflicts in your marriage and in your in-laws. What are some of the things that people can do? I think we touched on boundaries earlier on, so certainly have that boundaries discussion around, you know, where do you draw the line of, okay, no, that's as far as we're going to go with this relationship, and we won't tolerate this, and if this happens, then, you know, this is how we handle the situation. So I think the boundaries bit definitely works, but what other thing could couples do to kind of protect their marriage against families and in-laws?
Knowing when to pick your battles is a good one. In this life, we're going to rub each other off the wrong way. We are different people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So there may be situations where your in-laws do stuff where you're a bit like, but why are you doing that? And it rubs you off the wrong way. Sometimes things are not that deep. Like things are really not that deep. You can't always pick a fight with everything that they do. But sometimes it also takes you just taking a minute to process what's just happened, but then approaching them on the side and being like, oh, why did that happen? Like, I don't understand why that happened, or it genuinely hurt my feelings. Sometimes people genuinely don't realize that stuff that they're doing is hurting you unless you go and tell them that the stuff that they did has hurt you. So that's another way you can approach it.
So this is a bit of a radical thought, and I think for some of you, you're probably at this stage where you might need to just create some distance between your marriage and your family. Whether that distance, and I don't mean like literally cut them off or anything like that. Yeah. From a day-to-day living perspective, right? You don't see them every day, maybe, or you know, you don't spend every waking moment with them. You kind of create a little bit of distance, and that will help to kind of sever that mishmash that we mentioned earlier a little bit more, and it helps to maybe create that boundaries a little bit more as well, to say, okay, great, we'll see you on the weekends, but you know, during the week we're doing our own thing or whatever. But I definitely think for some of you, creating that distance will help.
So what are some ways that you guys deal with conflict when it's arisen with your in-laws? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what you do. Maybe it's things that we can take on board as well and start practicing in our relationship with our in-laws. So make sure you leave that comment down below, and we'll see you in the next one.